Hello, Abnormal Investigations. Got an encounter for you. Couldn't think of a better night to actually share this encounter. We got thunderstorms and rain outside, so kind of sets the mood for an encounter, right? You know, Mom always said, the worse the thunderstorms, the worse the encounter. And this story that I'm going to give you all is going to lead me into giving you a little bit of information that happened to my family. I think there's possibly some things in here that are interesting that may go together. So let's go ahead and get into this encounter, and then we'll discuss it at the end. I'd like to start off by stating the general area where I encountered this thing took place, and it also continues to take place. I, as well as generations of my family, was born and raised in West Virginia, right in the Appalachian Belt. My grandmother has about 7 acres on a mountain where we all run wild as children. Now as adults, we sit at night around a bonfire enjoying the peaceful sounds. However, there comes a point in the night where the air grows heavy and sinister. Even my grandmother's 2 big dogs will refuse to go off the porch to potty. We don't know what lurks in the surrounding woods, but sometimes it makes itself known. When my 3 aunts' mother and 3 uncles were younger, they did what all of us did as kids, roam the woods. My grandmother's property has what we call a spring house, which is exactly how it sounds. It's a concrete block structure that has a peaceful and fresh spring that runs through it. It was used before running water was put in the old farmhouse that sits atop of the mountain overlooking the entire property. At that point, the spring house had been worn down, and the woods began to overtake it, surrounding it so that it was buried deep. The weird thing about this spring house was that only openings set atop of it, so in order to even get into it, you would have to drop down from the top. As kids, you aren't really afraid of much except for darkness and at night time. It was apparently broad daylight when one of my aunts, we'll call her N, got the idea to do just that, to drop in. When she dropped in, it all seemed fine. It was pitch dark, but she could feel and hear the water around her. She heard the soft breathing, and she turned to one of the corners of the spring house. There sat an all-white humanoid creature. It was staring at her. They were both stunned to see one another. This thing had sickly white skin, elongated limbs, and dark holes for facial features. Suddenly, fear pushed her forward, and she began screaming at my other aunt, we'll call her B, to pull her up. Her glasses slid off her face and hid into the water below. She could feel the thing moving now, and she screamed more. One of my uncles, we'll call him K, yanked her out of the hole, where she then began running toward the house. Her fear spurred an entire group, and they all followed her. Eventually, she calmed down enough to tell them all what she had seen, and they never went near the spring house again. I'm not sure if she told my grandmother, as my grandmother is very religious and even to this day brushes off any paranormal experience we have at her place. Now, the story doesn't end here. It actually is just getting started. Years later, when my aunts and uncles were all grown up with children of their own, the spring house lured some of my cousins and sister in. They have heard of the white creature down there, but of course they didn't believe my aunts. Kids being kids, they went through the woods until the spring house came into view, and they planned to drop into it. My cousin dropped down first. My sister lingered over the hole and stared down at her. Not dropping in yet, it took all of a few seconds before my cousin heard heavy breathing. Her fear immediately spiked, but she didn't say anything. Instead, she just turned to the sound. My aunt's glasses sat in the water beside the same all-white elongated creature. This time it didn't hesitate and began to stretch out its limbs to move. She scrambled up and out with the help of her sister, and they too booked it back to the house. They told my aunt and mother what happened, and they didn't deny the creature's existence, but insisted and consoled them as best as they could. When I eventually came into this world, I was always roaming my grandmother's property. I rarely liked going to school, instead wanted to roam the woods and collect anything and everything I could find. I was often alone, only at my grandma's farm dog following me about. However, the first time I saw the creature, it was during a family get-together. The adults were drinking by a bonfire, when a few of my cousins and I decided to play a game called Cops and Robbers. It was basically hide and seek, but instead, one of the seekers was a group of them, as well as a group of hiders. I was a hider, and I got the bright idea to hide behind the old Lincoln car parked in the barn, since I knew everyone else would be too scared to go out that far, as the light barely reached that far, only enough to see the shadows. The car was also on the property line with my grandmother's neighbors, where a mobile home sat unoccupied. The neighbor's house was a few feet away, and dark, as it was late. I sat down behind the car closest to the trailer. A few minutes went by, and I could faintly hear my cousins giggling and screaming gleefully, and I shuffled to a squatting position, smiling to myself. Suddenly, I heard a whistle from behind me. I stiffened instantly. My body seemed to know something wasn't right before my mind did. The whistle came softly again. It was almost too quiet to hear the sound used to get someone's attention. I heard it all the time when my great-uncle would use it to call his dog. This time, though, it sounded slightly distorted. I mustered up the courage to fully stand, and I turned toward the sound. Beside a tall tree near the trailer was an all-white creature. It was also squatting like I had been, but upon seeing me, staring in fear, it straightened. The thing was nearly 7 feet tall, a sickly white pale color, and it shone even in the dark. Its limbs were long and grotesque, and before I knew it, I was running as fast as my legs could take me. I collided with one of my cousins who was very close at the same time. We'll call her Jay, and we both slammed into the dirt. She screamed, and I was ready to. She got mad at me, and she was ready to rip me a new one, but must have seen the fear upon my face, because instead she asked me what was wrong. I ended up telling her, and we agreed to quit the game entirely. We went into the house for the rest of the night. A few months later, though, the incident was nearly forgotten by us. Once again, the adults were partying, and we were playing the same game. I stayed well away from the barn at this point, and only hid near my house, staying in the light as much as I could. My cousin Jay did not. She had a spurt of bravery in something, and went further than I had previously gone, going directly behind the old barn. Behind the barn was nothing but woods for literal miles, and no light reached that far. The moon was particularly bright and full that summer night, though she told me that's why she could see slightly out there. After a few moments, she got bored and began to jog around the barn instead of just retracing her steps, and that's when, out of the corner of her eye, she saw a man in a bright red sweater just sitting on an all-white lawn chair, staring into the woods. Now, we knew who all was there. This man didn't look like any relative of ours or nearby neighbors either. The creepy thing was, he didn't even jump or move when she came by, as if he was frozen. His skin was sickly white, like the creature's had been. It almost glowed. Obviously, she ran back to the house calling my name. We met up, and she told me what had happened. We never really said much to each other or to the grown-ups when they were drinking, as they always had a habit of laughing at whatever we told them. So we took it upon ourselves to investigate, and I don't recommend anyone ever does this. Together we crept toward the barn. We peeked around the corner to see the lawn chair empty, no one around. As we turned to walk back, I heard my name whispered inside of the dilapidated barn. Jay heard it too, and her eyes widened as she looked at me, and I looked at her. We both ran tears in our eyes. That night we slept with my poor grandma smashed up against one another. The whisper still scares me to this day. Just thinking about it sends shivers up my spine. The next night we slept in the upstairs spare bedroom, as they call it, and to our horror my grandma's dog kept looking into our deceased great-grandmother's room and growling softly. We shut the door, with him inside the room with us, until morning, as we didn't dare to step into the front of her room to get to the stairs. After telling my Aunt Bee about this next day, she admitted the upstairs portion of the house always scared her. When I inquired why, she told me when she was a little girl she had watched a cheesy horror movie about scary creatures. In her young mind, though, it was pretty scary. Afterwards, her and my mother slept in the third bedroom at the end of the hall. She was having trouble sleeping due to the movie replaying in her mind. She dozed off, but at one point she heard heavy breathing. The room was suddenly hot and moist as well. Her eyes shot open as she saw a werewolf-like creature sitting at the bottom of the bed. Its eyes were on her. It stayed like this until morning. Now, obviously, this isn't the same creature we had all been seeing, but I know skinwalkers can mimic voices and other things, and they will try to scare the shit out of you. And that night it had been the werewolves for her. So maybe this creature was similar and could mimic our fears. Anyways, after she told me this, I stopped going upstairs for a long time. When I stayed with my grandmother in the summer, I slept downstairs in the living room on her couch. I was always frightened there at night. I constantly left the TV playing to drown out any noises, as my grandma liked to sleep with her doors and windows wide open. A few times I was awakened by the shadow of a person stepping in front of the TV to stare. Then it would proceed into the kitchen. It always terrified me, but I would convince myself I was dreaming. However, it always happened at around 3 a.m. in the morning on the dot. Sometimes I swear the kitchen light would switch on, and the faucet in there would turn on, water exploding loudly onto the ceramic. My grandma, who had made her bed in the living room as well due to having arthritic knees and could not climb the stairs nightly, never heard any of this from her. However, her dog, who usually slept on my legs, would sit up, ears perked up, watching the kitchen with a slight growl. Now, this was happening after my great-grandmother had passed, and she was an odd creature. When she was alive at 3 a.m. every night, she would go into the kitchen, turn the lights on, and just sit at the table for hours playing cards on a wooden dining room table. When I asked her why the few times, she always told me, "I can talk to my husband. He had died a long time ago. But as a young kid, I thought this was all very weird. My great-grandmother and I never ever got along, so if it was her doing this at night now, I still don't feel too safe. I even had a dream about her after the kitchen light flickered on and off. I was very scared of her." As I was shocked to see her because even in the dream I knew she had died, I walked to the steps. The rest of the house was dark besides the one light. She looked like her usual self, in her normal all-white attire. However, when I looked up at her and smiled, she frowned deeply. I sensed something was wrong. Then, like it was not her, she spoke in a deep, harsh tone and like her unusual voice. "Hello." I was scared now, every hair on my body standing, and I tried to wake myself, somehow knowing this was a dream. "What are you doing here?" I stammered, stepping back. Whatever the thing was that mimicked her smile, and it mimicked her smile cruelly, "I've come to tell you something very important. You're all going to hell, and this is hell. All the demons are here." After the words were out, I was suddenly awake, gasping for air. I kept replaying her. It's her words all night, unable to sleep. My mind decided all meant my family and I were distraught for days after I told them what had happened and that she said we was going to go to hell. Every night after that, when I would go to sleep, I would see her standing in the hallway in her white dress, and she was screaming at me that we was all going to hell and that we lived in hell. I was so afraid. And then when I would look to the kitchen, I could hear that faucet running. And I finally seen something that made me leave the house never to return. The man in the red shirt was sitting at the table, and he was smiling at me with this huge smile with lots of teeth. And he started cracking them together like biting, and I could hear him just cracking, and he started grinding them. I screamed to the top of my lungs. Everybody rushed to me. After that, we had left the house. We never returned back, because my grandmother had passed away. Now they were both gone. And I hate to say it, but I'm kind of glad they are, because I wouldn't have wanted to stay another night in that house. You know, uh, I would probably disagree and say that you did not have a skinwalker in your house. I'm going to say this was demonic activity. Um, just by everything that you're explaining that happened, the screaming you're going to hell, the everybody's fears seeming to just materialize into different things, not being one set thing. Your grandma saying she used to sit in the kitchen and talk to her dead husband. It just sounds to me like you had a whole lot of demons in that house and familiar spirits. Best thing you could have done is get that house blessed. I don't believe it's encrypted. I believe at this point what you're dealing with was demonic haunting. And I would get a preacher and I'd pray over it and get some oil. If I still live there, it's probably a good thing that you're not there anymore. I wouldn't go there because I would be afraid of a hitchhiker if I was you, and I think you have a high chance of that there. Thank you everybody for listening to this. I really appreciate the encounter. It's a very scary encounter, and I have covered this one before. The reason I recovered it tonight is because whenever I done it, this was reported a lot, this story, which caused it not to get the traction that I was hoping it would get. And due to the massive reporting on it, people was reporting it, it caused it not to get the traction. And I believe this is an important one to get out, because I believe that these things are misidentified, and I believe that that kind of hurts us sometimes. And I'm not saying people are doing it on purpose, it's just they don't know. And I think it's very important that we know. Did y'all hear that thunder? It's a good night for a story, huh? And but no, I don't think this was anything cryptid. I believe this was a demonic. I want to thank you all for listening. Keep your head on a swivel. Don't be something's dinner. And we'll definitely see you on the next one. And don't forget, tonight, live at 8 o'clock is going to be our live. So don't miss it.